And good Wednesday morning here this July 2nd. It is just 5 after 11 o'clock right here on WBRT. My name is Ryan Hack, broadcasting to you live here from the Colton Steakhouse and Grill Studio in the illustrious city of Bardstown. It's time here for Bradford and Brooks. Now, Jim Brooks is, of course, preoccupied down in Warren County covering the ongoing proceedings of the ongoing trial in Warren County, but Margie Bradford is here, of course, to stand in the gap, and we're joined by a very special guest here today. Dixie Hibbs has joined us in studio as well. It's good to have both of y'all here.
Well, thank you. We're glad to be here.
Well, we could tell some tales. Margie and I have traveled the world.
Yes, we
And
have.
sometimes we came back. You know.
Well, we came back, but came back scarred in some way.
That's right.
Dixie, I'm so glad to have you for my guest this morning,
Yeah.
and I want you to talk about your new publication, but
Okay.
before that, I want to recognize the fact and that you are an award-winning author, historian, and general tale-keeper of all the things happening in Kentucky and Nelson County in particular. And I want you to talk about the award that you received in May, the Ida Lee Willis Memorial Foundation Historic Preservation Award. That's quite a mouthful.
Well, it
So
is. It's a statewide award.
Yes.
And, I know several people locally who achieved it over the years. David Hall for one, Linda Brookheimer another, Ann Early Sutherland. They all had received the same award, and I was honored to be listed among them. I'm very surprised, but I was nominated by the Historic Preservationists in the city of Bardstown. And I got a telephone call, and then I had to figure out if I had enough energy to get there. But I took several of my family and all with it because it probably would be the highest award I would get in Kentucky. I'm not running for governor or anything like that, you see.
Good, thank
you. It dealt with my lifelong activities, the times that I've spent researching history here and helping people look at their houses and try to figure out how old they are and what they should do. And also, I have written 16 books. I learned early on that I could not remember everything to tell people, so we had to put it down in book form. But the reality being, once that if you have the interest, if you don't have the interest, stay around me long enough and I'll get you interested, because we have such wonderful history, stories here in Nelson County. The people who came and stayed, and also the people who went on west and did lots of things all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But Bardstown has over 300 buildings listed on the National Register. That means we have a legacy that we must take care of. And we are proud of them. We spend money on them. The main thing we do is respect the building and the people who have saved it over these years. I had a very emotional day that day. The people came up to me later and asked things, what did you do and how did you do these things and all. Most of the awards were given to groups that came and had saved buildings all over this part of Kentucky.
Exactly.
And they did a very good job. And the teepee, remember that day, down there on the way to Somerset, they have the Indian teepees. They were abandoned for a long time, but a couple of family members went together and went in and completely redid them. So now, if you wanted to spend...
they're genuine Indian teepees.
Well,
the wigwam
wigwams, that's what they call it, yes, wigwam. They built it in the 1930s. And it was of course, we didn't have 65 then. These were all 2-lane roads.
Right.
But that was a road to Florida. It was a place that many people passed. So they built these for people to spend the night. It was unique, And I remember as a young person, 8 or 9 years old, driving by and just waiting till I could see them. I knew I was going to see them as soon as we got on the road, and I never got to stay in them. Maybe I should try to go do it now, be one of those things. But I was very impressed, and proud of that honor. They even handed it to me framed, which is awful nice. Often we get awards and we have to go figure out how to frame them, but anyway.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you asking me to come, and I didn't bring the award to see or anything, but I have it in a prominent place, and I read it over and think, yeah, I guess I did all that.
Well, I know sometimes I know myself, I look back and think, how the heck did I do that?
All that, yeah.
Because you have so much more energy.
Well, it's one day at a time, but the reality is most projects take more than one day at a time, and once you commit yourself, and I think you and I both have that, I guess we got it from our families. If we say we'll do something, we'll do it. And unless we get arrested. Now, that's the only thing I told. When I became mayor,
get arrested.
We had a city attorney, and I said, the only thing I ask you to do is keep me out of jail. I said, because I might do something that I don't know is illegal, kind of thing. But so I never got in jail there. Now, I did before I was mayor, but that was because I was campaigning against taking an old building down, and they came, they said, Ms. Hibbs, you can't do that. And I said, what can I do? And he said, well, you can't stand there and fuss at these people. I said, I'll stand over there and fuss at them. So anyway, I'm a smart aleck. That's what's wrong. All right. Now,
well, the book, your latest publication, which I've just started, so I haven't gotten too far into it, but I've already found some really interesting stuff. And I want you to talk about that publication.
All right. Well, this was something that should have happened years ago, and it didn't. And I made up my mind I was going to make it happen. David Harold Hall, was a noted historian here. He knew a lot about architecture. He knew a lot about these buildings we have, and the architects, John Rogers and others, that changed the look of Bardstown. That's one reason when I walk around town or we drive around the circle, you start seeing all these different license plates. All the people come here. It's a place that you can come and touch history. You can touch these brick buildings that someone made in 1780. We didn't have an 80, sorry. 1798 is the oldest brick building we have in town. Our stone building, the old jail stone was built in 1820, and those rocks, stone, have been there ever since. Nobody's tried to knock them down because it'll take a tornado or something to get them down. But that said, the stories that I worked to pull together belong to David Hall. He, as I mentioned, was interested in history. He was interested in saving trees, the old trees. It takes so long to build, and we just cut them down right and left. But he always shared his knowledge, and often he wrote articles. Now, the Old Nelson Notebook was a series of newspaper articles in the Kentucky Standard. And David had gotten older and ill, and I asked if he would sell me the publication rights of anything that he had written and published, and he did. He never published anything himself, but I was determined to put his name on a book. Well, Old Nelson Notebook is what he named his publication, and they were small articles, 2 columns usually, and they were in the Standard almost every week, starting in the bicentennial of the nation. In the 76, I had help at the Nelson County Library because these stories are on microfilm. If you've ever tried to use microfilm, the first thing you have to do is buy you a big magnifying glass because it's awfully small. But I had help with Stephanie Clayton, and I had help with Janice Donad, and when we came to the actual publication, I had Cindy Howe. She is the layout person at St. Martin de Porres Publishing House, which is in Holy Cross. And that's something else that's probably a mystery to the public, that we have a publishing place in Nelson County. I have dealt with them since 1982, and they are very professional. They have the best publishing equipment around. And years ago, they were doing publishing for the Vatican. So I figured if they could please the Vatican, they could please me. But that said, they are on the other side of New Hope, beautiful area there. In the fall, I love driving over there because the trees are so beautiful and all. Well, we took the information from the Kentucky Standard. There are 64 stories and 86 pages in our book. And we have written it, laid it out, in two-column style like you would see in the newspaper. There's first of all, you can read a little quicker that way. I don't know if you realize that, but going halfway across the page with your eyes versus going all the way across and coming back, it's quicker to read. They're small enough for people who don't like to sit down and just stay there and read like I do. But they're short enough. If you've just got a few minutes, or if you're waiting for pick up children or something, you can read the whole story while you're waiting. And it's 99% of it takes place between 1777 and 1810. All the early years. We talk about the flatboats, which got us here. We talk about the forts that are built. We talk about laying out Bardstown and how it was changed. We talk about how few people were here. In the 1770s, we're in the middle of the Revolution. We were Virginia. We would not become Kentucky till 1792. So the first 12 years of Bardstown's being, we were Bardstown, Virginia. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't remember that. Maybe they never were told, but anyway. And when the time came for Nelson County as a county to come off of Jefferson County, at one point there were only the 3 counties. Excuse me. When it's time to come off, a large amount of Jefferson down south of the Salt River, there were 16 counties to come out of Nelson County. Today there's not, it's like Hardin County came out, and out of Hardin would come LaRue and all these others all the way over to the Ohio River. It was a wild time here in Kentucky, and the most numerous of the people and actions going on were what they call the long hunters, and those that came here not with their families, and they came on horseback or by foot, but they were ranging out of Virginia over into the western part of Virginia. And they often had the ability to claim land based on their activities in the French and Indian War. A lot of people think it's revolution. Early on, it was maybe you were a soldier for the Americans, but actually the British, because you were, at that point we were still British until revolution. But they would take off and live off the land, found places they thought they might like to go and claim land. Now, claiming land, today is so strange from years ago, but the families would have 6 or 7 children, maybe 3 boys and 4 girls, whatever. One farm wouldn't support them. So once the oldest son always got the land. That came about from Virginia. So the other children always were trying to figure out what was going to happen. Maybe they married and the husband took off and found them some land, and it's out here in what's now Kentucky. The Maryland settlers that came here in 1788, that was big for them because they had to leave the Maryland area. There just wasn't enough land to divide up and have enough to take care of everybody in their family. Kentucky was a great place to come, though. We had, if you were a hunter, if you needed meat, we had deer and we had all kinds of animals that you could hunt.
We did have bison also,
Yes,
right?
we did. We had what I call the eastern bison because it was shorter. It was like a shrunk down version of the western buffalo. But that's who we can acknowledge were our road builders, because when the settlers came, they didn't want to take an axe out and cut away through the woods. They followed the trail that was already there. And it made sense because the buffalo were going to go to the water. They were going to go up and over a hill the easiest way. They were able to, I don't know how they figured out where they were going, but maybe they just followed their nose like everybody else. But they did not last long here between the settlers and killing them. And they were a smaller one, but their heads were just as hard as the ones out west. They would put their heads down and they'd walk through the woods, and they'd knock the branches off with their head. Their hooves, which were like sharp, they could cut the growth down just walking through the woods. Well, here comes the settler. Why is he going to go chopping things when here's a road already there? Mm-hmm. And there's some roads in Kentucky still, right on the trail where the buffalo cut through.
Buffalo Trace, maybe?
Yes, Buffalo Trace, there you go. But there was one from High Grove all the way to Frankfort.
Really?
Mm-hmm. All the way to Frankfort. And so people knew it. And here's the other thing, we were talking about correspondence or conversation. no telegraph, no telephone. They could write letters. The letters were usually handed to somebody. We didn't have any way. 1790s, we did have post offices, very few and very far between. But the written word was so important that when I say the written, they could write on a piece of bark or something. But the reality is, when you had to go to court or you had to hire an attorney over a fight you were in over land, the paperwork was so important. And we still have paperwork from the 1780s, 90s, all up through, well, even next week, so to speak.
Well, one of the most fascinating things, and after I've just as I said, I've just started this, I've not gotten very far, was the production of paper. What an ordeal that was. So, you want to talk about that?
Yes, and we take it for granted here. Well, the only thing we get upset over is if we run out of toilet paper. Now, everything else is okay, but that is a necessity. But the reality of handmade paper, it was not made from trees or bark or anything like that. They didn't that way. They made it from cloth. All right, now how do you do that? You soak rags. You soaked things that were woven, and cotton usually, and you soaked them until they started to come apart, and they made a pulpy mess. And I say a pulp, it's like a real thick dough almost. It had more water than that. But they would put this mixture into screens, and these screens were rectangular usually, the size of the paper they wanted. They had a fine woven area of wire, and this wire is going to hold this pulp, because the pulp was too thick to go through it unless you pressed it down. Mm-hmm. So, but you did press it down, and you flattened it out, and you set it aside and let it dry. Okay, that's 24 pages, was called a quire, Quire. Now, I might have an accent on that, I'm not sure, but that's how it's spelled. And once that it was dry, they would peel it off, and they would sell it. 24 pages was a quire. In 1780s, the cost of that 24 pages was the same as a lot in Bardstown.
Amazing.
That's hard to imagine, isn't it?
Well, it was labor intensive, and it had to take a long time to do.
If anyone that's ever researched in the courthouse anywhere of those early records realize sometimes those pieces of paper are 2 inches long and the length of the quire, which might be 24 inches. Anyway, they never wasted any of it. They wrote on the front, they wrote on the back, and sometimes they wrote crosswise. Well, that's really fun when you're trying to read something that you're reading along and now you have to turn the paper because they've started writing across everything. But it was important, and it was a result of us being in the Revolutionary War, because before that we got our paper from Britain, from England. David, I have to tell you, David was a slow-talking, slow-thinking, I won't say slow, but he talked a lot, but he talked deliberately. And often I would do research for him, or I would find something in the court records I thought was really interesting, and I'd copy it all and take it to him.
Yes, I noticed Dixie Hibbs' name on a lot of these.
That was all done back in the 70s and 80s. And it was only published in the Standard. So that's why I bought his publication rights, because I didn't want anybody to say, what are you doing stealing this story? Well, no, I paid for it. Mm-hmm. But the reality, it is a way of going back. It's not 300 years yet, but it's 250 or something. Anyway, going back in that time frame and looking about the important things. There's a whole section on the early churches, how they found them, why did they put them here, and why did they put them there, and all. And there's my favorite section, which sounds bloodthirsty, but there's a first-hand account of the burning of a fort in Nelson County. They called it the burnt station later, of the wife and children. I'm not sure exactly how many off my top of my head, but the women and the children were captured and taken north to Detroit. Now remember, this is 1782. We're still in we haven't finished up with the Revolution. The British were in Detroit, and that's the British soldiers and things, and they were supplying the Indians with guns and most everything. We are still enemies. So when time came, the father came back. Here's the fort burned. His children are gone. The mother's gone. He goes and borrows money, because he has to have money, to go ransom them. And that's a word that they used. They could go and get
So evidently this has happened before,
Oh,
or
yes,
he would not
yes,
know that that's
yes.
what he needed
There
to
were
do.
a lot. Well, John Fitch was captured by Indians.
didn't
I know.
that.
See, that's not the most important thing about John Fitch, but it's another thought, another sidelight there about the time and what went on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he got away by amazing them with different things he knew to do. I don't know whether it was just the watch and things like that, but he was released without money, I think. But back again on this first-hand account, the young man, the boy, was somewhere around 8 years old, and they ended up taking him into a different Indian tribe. And all this went on over like almost 2 years. Mr. Polk was the name of the father. He gets his money together and he starts traveling around asking about this family, asking people who knew the Indians and asking Indians that were friendly and all. The upshot of it was he bought his wife and children back, came back to Nelson County, but he was broke. Everything he had spent, which he didn't seem to feel like misspent money because he was able to gather his family back up. The young boy told his story in a youngster's perspective. As an adult, he tells what he remembers and realizes what went on all around that. And all of that is written in one of these. Actually, there's 3 stories about it in this book. And I think about that whole situation about today. We have a lot of trouble today. We have shootings and we have, kidnappings and all that stuff. If you put yourself back in that time, you're on a horse or you're walking. No telegraph. You do send messages. Now, that's part of what Mr. Polk did. He sent messages out by other people to try to find out where the Indians had taken his family. And he was able to. One of them was an infamous, what did they call them? He had a lot to do with the Indians. He traded with them. He sold them guns and stuff like that. And he normally you would think this is bad, but he was the contact that Polk had to find because he knew where the children and all were. So it's a little mystery in there. There's 64 different stories, and some of them are only half a page. Some of them are a page and a half and all. And I was really happy with Cindy Howell at the St. Martin de Porres because she was able to put little illustrations in it that kind of broke it up. Now, when you start using illustrations, you've got to either pay for the copyright to use it, or you find some that aren't copyrighted. And she was able to put the flatboat. She was able to put all kinds of things that are written about in here. And they're not big pictures, but they make you stop and think when you go through it. It's a magazine type book. It's soft cover. And on the book, I took the oldest picture of downtown Bardstown I could find, and I put it on the front and the back. And if you opened up your book up, it's like standing in front of the courthouse looking north in 1890. There are buildings there in the picture that still are there today, and there are some that have been removed. But and some that were built like in 1880 or so right here that are still there. Like I mentioned, 300 buildings on the National Register. Most towns are happy to get 40 or 50. Mm-hmm. And 90% of these are pre-Civil War. It's hard to believe in it.
Yeah. Talking about the buildings, as I said, I was reading here about Isaac Cox, who's one of the original settlers.
He was a very important man here. He was head of the militia. He came out and he was appointed one of the judges, or not trustee, the court people, the person. We had a group that met and decided the innocence or guilt of different people and all. And then his militia time was very important. Now, the militia was your National Guard kind of thing. You had to, if you were over 20, I think, you had to serve. In other words, and you're serving to protect yourself and your neighbors and all, and you're serving mostly against the Indians. Now, during the Revolution War in the 1780s, early 80s, George Rogers Clark, the biggest thing that happened here in this area was this George Rogers Clark expedition in the winter, in the water. I think about it every time I think about floods in Indiana. You don't think about floods in Indiana, but they were going to Vincennes, which was a French settlement, fort, over toward St. Louis. They were going to surprise the soldiers and all there. British soldiers were there at the time, and so the militia left from the Louisville area, and they went all the way almost to St. Louis in the winter, and they talk about water up to their knees, water up to their hips, trying to keep the powder dry and all that. And this was Virginia then, so he actually was a soldier of Virginia. And it made a lot of difference in the war. In this minute, I can't tell you exactly how, but that was an expedition that was okayed by the Virginia government and made a big difference out here in the West. It stopped people from coming back toward Kentucky and back toward Virginia. Also, Virginia didn't pay their bills. Clark had the ability to borrow money and to have people like a debt. He had an ability to put them in debt. And it was time to pay the bills from the government in Virginia, and they didn't do it. And so he had to pay the bills. And almost all of his estate went toward paying the bills of the Revolution, which was very unfair. But when we look back on history, I think we can always find then the right and the wrong of things. And some people do the right thing, but then they don't. Their people that they're doing it for don't pay them back and things. This book just came out 2 weeks ago. I have it for sale at the Artist Barrel, which is directly across from Town and Country Bank in downtown Bardstown. I have written 16 books. Not all of them are still in print, but the ones that I have in print are for sale at the Artist Barrel. This one I told someone would make a great gift for an uncle or a grandfather or something, because again, unless they read every one of David's articles in 17...
And still remembered them.
Yeah, that's true on that part. And David had a way of talking like I do. Sometimes I get one subject, but I end up with 2 or 3 predicates that didn't quite fit. So we did a little bit of a shake-up on his, because when I do a speech, it's not something that I would write. I would have to go back and straighten it up because of the hesitations and the different things. So we straightened it up pretty good, and he also gave reference to where he found the information. For a researcher, that's great. What's he talking about and where did he find it? Because most of this had to be found. It wasn't printed somewhere for him to copy and all. David died in January, and he knew I was working on this, but I didn't realize he had had a stroke, and he didn't get to see it, but I know he knew what I was doing, and he always signed David H. Hall, and he was very good about drawing, and this is always on the top of the article, say.
Illustration to go with the articles.
With the articles, yeah. Now, most of the illustrations were things we had to do, but that was typical of what he liked to do, lettering and all. He didn't do computer, and some of it we actually had to. I mentioned we copied it. It was handwritten, but most of it, his handwriting was mostly printing, easy to write, easy to read, and all.
Dixie, in the book, you talk a lot about the buildings and about the establishment of the city of Bardstown.
Right.
And one of them was, which I thought interesting, is about why Broadway is Broadway.
Well,
why it's the widest street in town.
Well, William Bard was the person who was in charge of laying the town out, selling the lots and things like that. His brother, David Bard, was a minister up in Pennsylvania. Sorry. He was a minister and later became a politician. I thought that was interesting. But anyway, David was a brother that stayed up there, and William was a surveyor that was here. William also surveyed Louisville when they were laying that out. You have to think at the time, Bardstown had more people in it in the number, the census count of 1790 than Louisville. That's hard to believe, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what happened. Louisville wasn't a healthy place to live. It had swampy land, like, you hear of the different creeks and things that flood down there when they had drain and all. And Bardstown was much healthier. And that was one of the things William Bard used to encourage people to come to Bardstown. It's healthy. We're up on a hill. I forget about your thing. And when you say you're up on a hill, well, today being up on a hill with the way rain comes is really healthy. You're up higher than the water. And the same way with disease. Standing water draws mosquitoes.
Right.
And they didn't know all the time what happened, how they got from fevers, but they knew that standing water was not good. And we were on a river, as most of the developments in Kentucky, almost all of them are on a river of some kind.
Right.
That was the road. Healthy, on a river, close to the buffalo trails. We had close to the roads and the roads. And we also had influential people who bought land here, out of Maryland and out of Pennsylvania. They went on and invested their land here, and they bought 2 or 3 lots or 4, something like that. And they were willing to be politicians, or willing to be leaders in the community. And that's another thing. You were talking about a house. There is a house on West Flagey, and it's right next door to Scout and Scholar. It's a brick house. And either the granddaughter or the great niece of Jefferson Davis lived there. She was a Cox. She was
Right. Well, that's the Isaac Cox.
Isaac Cox, yeah,
Right.
Isaac Cox's.
Right.
But on her, I don't know how, I can't say it right now, but she was known. She was Mary May, and she was known to be a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. One other thing, you talked about the wide street. William Bard wanted to have a wide street that had 2 lanes, so to speak. It had a medium that went down the center that would be planted with trees or things like that. And if you ever on Broadway, it's 132 feet wide. It's twice as wide as a regular street. But the whole idea was this was like a promenade, or you had your driving, or your lanes you're going to drive on are over to the north and the south, and right in the middle you'd have maybe 40 feet or something, you'd have like a divider that you would beautify. And Broadway always kept its name. The other streets changed names in the 1937, I think. And Stephen Foster was not Stephen Foster till 1937. But anyway, the Broadway also allowed to have a marketplace, a market house out in the middle. It had the firehouse out in the middle across the street in the intersection of Broadway and North 3rd. So on one side you had a market house, and I think it's really fun that our farmers market today is almost identical with the hours and things that they had back 150 years ago. They had, on Tuesday and Friday and different things like that. But they would come and rent space in this shed, basically, covered, and they had their own weights, the scales. Because if you're going to buy 100 pounds of something, you got to have a scale, because nobody can guess what 100 pounds weighs.
Yeah.
But that was always operated from like 1820s all the way through early 1900s. And then now we came back and they're doing it again, kind of thing. On that.
I want to go back to when people came and Kentucky was just opening up, and people would come in and scout to good places to build.
Yeah.
They would do improvements.
Yeah.
What they called improvements,
Yeah.
and then lay claim to that land. So they could, and then leave and go back to where they came from,
Right.
but use that as a way of claiming.
Okay. First thing, though, before they came, they had to have a certificate.
Okay.
And sometimes it wasn't for them. They call them long hunters. The first scouts that came through, they had been hired, or maybe they offered their services. Maybe that's better. 4 or 5 people, men, horses, camping, and all that. They've collected certificates from people who had helped the government during the French and Indian War. Now, that's the early years. Later, you had the military areas, which is down closer to Owensboro and Paducah and all. That's another setting. But these claim makers, so to speak, the claims had to be located, written about, and it also had to be marked on the trees. You had to find some way to show you had been there. And some of them would mark and then put initials. Others would measure, actually legally measure from here to here. Often they were on the creeks, they wanted water, and they wanted to get somewhere. But if they would come, they would mark them, and then they would enter them in a book. And we have these books, the land claims books. And then, but remember, we aren't Kentucky. We're still in Virginia.
Right.
So a lot of that had to go back to Virginia, Williamsburg, and then come back. And if you didn't bring your survey back, your claim wasn't as clean. And that's what all the lawyers that we had here in the early 1800s had land claim cases. And that's what I said. All the lawyers built big houses because people argued over the land. Yeah.
Well, what about Boone? Isn't that what happened to him?
Yeah.
He didn't get, somehow or another didn't.
He didn't get his land registered.
Didn't get his, and then he moved on to Missouri, Cape Girardeau.
Yeah, Missouri. He was more of adventuresome fella, and he's made the news and all because of his Indian contacts, and he lived with the Indians for a while. I mean, he was captured, and they admired his expertise in things, and I think he may have been traded once and ran away another time. I'm not an expert on Boone, but I do know that he lost a son and a daughter in all of the settlement going on here. It was a rough time here. It would be almost like us going to the Amazon and trying to keep a living or make a living or survive there. It was just prayers and a gun and where's the water, so to speak. Yeah.
Well, wasn't Cox's Station one of those early?
It was early, but I don't know that it was a fort. It was a fortified house, I think. Okay. And we don't have a picture of it. We know where it was. We had several forts. Bardstown didn't have one around it. There were forts around us. There was one out on the Elizabethtown Road on 62, and there's another one. There's two over toward Bloomfield, Cox's Station. I'd have to look at a map now on where they are. Most of the time, they were there for temporary in the sense that you didn't have a house when you got here. You're going to have to build a house, claim your land, figure out where you're going to put your house. Hopefully, you're bringing your in-laws, outlaws, and everybody because you're going to need them for protection and for help. First thing you did once that you got settled is clear the land for a crop, probably corn. And the reason corn, it grew very well, very quickly. All you had to do was put the kernel in the ground and jump back. And there's actually a provision that you could buy more land if you could prove you had been in Kentucky long enough to have planted a crop of corn and for it to come up. You got to buy about 300 acres more. And you had your certificate, and I should have brought one. I'm not going to tell the story about it, but it was framed. It was from Isaac Height, and it has Patrick Henry's signature on it. Somebody was going to throw it out because they couldn't read it. Well, Dixie could read it. So anyway, I had but it was a certificate from Virginia, 1783. And it was telling how this person had claimed the land, and then he had signed it over to another person, and that's who got the certificate. And Patrick Henry signed his name P. Henry. He never signed Patrick. He always had P. Henry. He's a signer of the Declaration of Independence in Virginia, and also, and we have all kinds of records like that. We just have to keep up to where they are and not put them away and not let them walk out of here. But I feel a kinship to these people, I think, mostly because if you study the old records for any length of time, you're going to have disease and death. You're going to have children that disappear. The Indians might have taken them. Maybe they fell in the water. Who knows? It was a really hard life, but people kept coming. 1788, the Catholics of Maryland came in here in a group. They came mostly in family groups, because you had to have help. You couldn't take your axe and your deerskin jacket here and go alone. You could not do it alone. You might be a scout, but you aren't here to stay if you're a scout. But they would bring the children, the grandchildren. I tried in school one time to ask, I was talking about coming here, coming on the flatboats or on a horse or whatever, and I said, if you could only bring 3 things, and I'm talking to grade school children, 3 things with you, what would you bring? And I just talked about what we would use and all. And the little boy threw his hand up. He said, I'd bring my chainsaw and some toy that he loved. Got to bring his chainsaw here because he's got to cut the tree, you know. So he understood to a point, except chainsaws were way in the future kind of thing. we're fortunate that we have those cabins down there, Bardstown Village, that the children can use their imagination, and they can be told the story. And if you tell history in a story, you remember it. If you just tell facts, tell me when the Kentucky became a state. Well, if you didn't remember, you didn't remember. But
Right.
it's 1792, and we became the state because we were so far from Virginia. Williamsburg, Virginia is a trip.
Yep.
And horseback is a real trip. So there were enough people in Kentucky, influential people. When they say that people that were willing to work in government, in the militia, in business people always made things grow. That's kind of crude to say, but when they came, brought money and merchandise, and they exchanged it for other things. Even the county, you could pay your taxes in Nelson County by fox hides, fox skins, because they wanted, foxes were an irritant, I guess you'd say. They would eat the chickens, and they would different things. So they gave it a price, and if you brought your fox skins in, you paid your taxes. And then during the War of 1812 in New Orleans, now we're fighting the British again. The Kentucky sharpshooters, that's what they call them. They were the young men who had learned to shoot long rifles very successfully, and they were mowing down the poor British. But that Andrew Jackson said he gave them credit for that battle, for the Americans to win that battle. But the boys that learned to shoot with the long rifles, that was money. If they killed so many pelts and this, that, and the other, they had income, or they had meat for the table or whatever. So, and they didn't have that much ammunition, so they had to shoot that squirrel and make sure they hit him with one. In fact, sometimes they didn't even hit the squirrel. They hit the branch on the tree the squirrel was standing on, and they hit him close enough they didn't blow him up, but they knocked him off with the shot itself.
We did have a field day in my backyard.
Oh, yeah. A squirrel field day? Is that what we're having? I thought you were talking about guns. I didn't know.
Talk to us about the population of Kentucky at that time.
Well, I like to talk about Kentucky. Well, first of all, in 1777, this is Virginia now, but in the Kentucky Territory, there were 198 total. 65 of them were kids under 10. We not only brought the husband and father, we brought enough kids so if somebody...
Yeah, you got that's the future.
Right, and that's 77. In 1790, in Nelson County, Bardstown, we had 9 more citizens than Louisville did. In the state, you had 75,000. Now, 1790, Nelson County is still the size of 16 counties. So those 75,000 are spread out all the way from Floyd County in eastern Kentucky, all the way to the Ohio River. I mean, everywhere. You just didn't have that many. You had to have people. Another reason we have so many counties in Kentucky, the government decided you needed to be able to get to your county courthouse, county seat, in less than 1 day's travel. Now, if you've ever been in the mountains of Kentucky, it's hard to get anywhere less than 1 day's travel. They started out with large counties, and then they divided them up. And politically, they had more people in Frankfort and stuff like that. But I thought 9 people more than Louisville in 1790 was pretty interesting, because Louisville was collecting all of the traffic coming down the Ohio. The Ohio was the highway, and it was, your produce went down there. Later on, your barrels of whiskey, your hemp, your what else they used a lot? Tobacco. They had big barrels of tobacco. They were much bigger than what we think about in bourbon and stuff. Then in 1800, now that's 20 years. No, it's 18 years. Again, no. Try again. 8 years after Kentucky became a state, we had 220,000. 40,000 of them were slaves.
And that's in the whole state area.
Whole state, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about slaves, we were Virginia, and Virginia was dependent on slaves. They were a agricultural state. And at that time, you were allowed to take your slaves from one place to another. Later, there were laws that were put together that controlled. You couldn't bring them into Kentucky to sell them. You could bring them here if they were part of your family or group kind of thing, that you built houses, and all of them. Some of the, when you look on your census, they'll talk about people, the slaves particularly, who had talents on, whether they were blacksmiths or whether they were woodworkers or things that were more valuable than just working the land.
Didn't they, owners also sometimes hire them out to other people?
Sure. Particularly if you lived in town, that you weren't using them for farming things or gardening and things like that. And then they also, now here you're talking about that, the program we have that talks about apprentices. You hear about apprentices now and
Right.
different things. Okay. You could apprentice your son or daughter to a craftsman, and there's official contract, and we have those in the courthouse, that said that the man, the craftsman who was going to sign the paper, said he would teach him to a certain level of numbers, like arithmetic up to a certain point. He would feed him, and he would educate him, he would clothe him. He would tell what kind of clothing he would wear, and when he left your apprenticeship, he got a new suit. Now, they may be apprenticing 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds.
Really?
Because often the orphans were apprenticed. There's a man who made a fortune later. What is his name? My long-term memory's now gone. Anyway, he dealt with pelts, leather. He built like cattle. You take the skin of a cow and you soaked it and you made leather and you made saddles and bridles and all that. Now today we would go to the car part to buy something. Then you bought a saddle or you bridles or whatever, and that was a really good thing here. We had good places to soften up the leather, the skin, and all that. The man that I'm talking about was apprenticed at 8 years old, and he went on to be such a good worker and all. He had his own tannery. His 2 sons went into business with him. I mean, they went 3 generations.
This is a former slave.
No, this is white. This young man.
All right.
He lost his father. He lost his father.
I see.
It was both women, both whites. Well, it could be anybody, even the women. After the Civil War, they started contracting with the daughters of, most often, orphans, to learn the housekeeping and things like that, weaving.
Right.
And the contract was a legal piece of thing, and if they didn't do what they're supposed to, the contract with the apprentice was broken.
Right.
In other words, they couldn't mistreat them or not feed them and things like that. But that was a program that really helped a lot of people. It was just like now, if we sent you to college to learn to be a doctor, okay, you have to go in through a procedure or something.
Yeah.
Well, the same way here with...
Like doing internship.
That's exactly. And some of these were real smart. I wish I could think of his name. Anyway, he went on to be very successful. But his apprenticeship is in the records over there. Mm-hmm. My problem, how about that? How many problems do I have? One of my problems is my curiosity. I want to know what happened. And to know what happened, you have to go back in those time periods and read what was left, what was said, what was done and all. And I've always liked to read, and I read fast. And I can read cursive, which is... and the old cursive, the worst lawyer I ever saw that wrote something was Ben Hardin. I cannot read anything Ben Hardin ever wrote. I don't know how he read it, but he was a very good attorney and a politician, but he sure couldn't write very well. Now, why am I fussing about Ben Hardin's writing in 2025? Because the people who can't read cursive in the future cannot read any of this.
Oh, that's... Yeah, that's
going to be real bad.
Really startling when you think about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've known some young men who they could sign their names, but they couldn't do anything else in cursive, and they couldn't read it. So if I wrote a handwritten note to them, I can't hardly write now, but I mean, if handwriting.
You mean my grandchildren haven't recognized anything I've written?
Probably not. And they want to print everything. Well, even then, you don't always can't read it sometimes. Right. I'm not dismayed about the future of our youngsters in history because there's so many interesting stories. And if you can get hooked on a story, then you'll keep looking. And I mean, Kentucky has so much going on. It's had feuds, it's had assassinations, it's had a lot of positive things, all these wonderful houses we have in Kentucky. Ohio doesn't have this. Indiana doesn't have all these solid brick houses that were built early and are still being used. And like I said, I always...
Oh, and of course the cathedral.
Oh, the cathedral is the first cathedral west of the Alleghenies. Now, Alleghenies were the mountains between Virginia and Kentucky and run down into the Shenandoahs. We had, in 1808, there were 4 new dioceses, Catholic dioceses, formed in the United States. Up to then, there was 1. Well, the Bishop Carroll petitioned the Pope to form 4. They formed Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Bardstown, out here in the middle of nowhere. That was 1808.
So our cathedral is older than one in St. Louis.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and the thing that I'm proud of on the one here, we built the cathedral before those other 3 big towns.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well, they had more money, they had more people, and I don't know whether they just couldn't decide what to do or not. Sometimes more people doesn't equal getting things done. But there's a lot of the things that sometimes we put together tests or games about how to help remember things, and that's how we say it's the oldest cathedral west of the Alleghenies. Now, Ohio came off as a diocese in 1820. Bishop Flagey appointed the minister there, or the bishop there. St. Louis, I'm not sure exactly what year, but the Jesuits were in St. Louis in 1840, and then they came to Bardstown. And our school here benefited from that. We were known here in Bardstown for educational. We had private schools, we had Catholic schools.
And in fact, people from all over the South sent their sons there.
Absolutely. There's 3,000 students. Now, I'll never do that again. There's things I've said I'd do again, but I would never go back and try to figure out all the students who went to St. Joseph College between 1827 and 1899.
No.
3,000. Some of them stayed 4 years, some stayed 1, some stayed 6. You could say 6. And it was a boarding school, but then the local students could go, day students they called them, and they went during the day and then went home at night. But we had lawyers, we had governors, we had inventors, we had a poet, I'm trying to think of his name now, O'Hare. What's his last name? I mean, it was a classic education, and it benefited the community. The Protestants in Bardstown, which were more than the Catholics, when Bishop Flagey got here, there were less than 20 Catholics here. But it was located conveniently to where there were Catholic settlements all around. Lexington, down on the western, over in Brandenburg, south. We were located right, and we had people here who were willing to help. The Protestants donated more than $25,000 toward building the cathedral.
Really?
Well, it was an investment, and they were proud of it. It wasn't finished by 1819. They didn't have the bell tower, and they didn't have the front porch. And I've written a book about St. Joseph Cathedral and St. Joseph College, and I've been very fortunate to be able to go back to the actual letters that Bishop Flagey wrote back to Europe, talking about what was going on here and what he was getting done. And Flagey was a wonderful priest. He was a pastor. He wasn't a person of administration. He didn't like to deal with administration, and he hated to ask for money. Well, you got to ask for money. I may have to ask for something else. But Flagey had the best heart, and so he wasn't just loved by the Catholics, he was loved by the Protestants. He did a lot of positive things like that. And that wasn't my opinion. That was actually borne out in documents. Historians have a hard time. Once they know all this stuff, they start giving their opinions, and you got to watch that, because sometimes you didn't read that right. There was a word left out or something. So, but you can tell that I like to talk history.
I said Dixie's the only person I know who wanted to read deeds for fun.
Oh well, yeah.
Are we about?
Yes.
We're about out of time here.
Yeah, sorry, I should have been watching better.
Oh, no, it's fine. Yeah, we talked an hour away there, and you said again that this book here is available at the Artist's Barrel.
Artist's Barrel, which is on the west side of the second block And they're open.
And it's a very reasonable
Yeah,
price.
it's $15, and it's a great gift. I think I shouldn't brag about it, but I would, if I hadn't put it together, I would have bought it for a gift for someone. But and we're open 7 days a week. We're open on Sunday at Tardy Barrel, but that is a place where other people who create things sell. I call it a mini mall of handcrafted things. You'll see a little bit of everything. But most of the books that I have available are there because it's very convenient. Some places open 7 days a week. You can't get much better than that.
Oh, yeah. No, that's for sure. Well, thank you very much, Dixie, for coming in, and thank you, Margie, for coming in here again for this edition of Bradford and Brooks right here on WBRT. Coming up, we have got our noon newscast.